Hello friends, this is Nishat and I'll be taking up Sociology Foundation course and test series here at Level Up IAS. As far as my academic background is concerned, I have done BTech from IIT BHU, so I'm that way BTech just like all of you. But I did my MA in Sociology from Delhi School of Economics, Department of Sociology, Delhi University. The same department which was established by some most eminent scholars and sociologists like Andre Bete, M.N. Srinivas and A.M. Shah. Out of these three names, you must be familiar, very much familiar with the first two names, that is Andre Bete and M.N. Srinivas, because they are given explicitly in your syllabus. The third one, A.M. Shah, is equally important scholar, and more so because he died this year itself, so that makes it more important for you. So, instead of expressing remorse or grief over his death, I'm telling you that he has become more important for this exam this year, specifically sociology paper. Okay, more so when he has given this concept on family and household dimension. Okay, household dimension to the family. This is the extent to which we have become rational. Okay, people were wondering where did this question on Marx and Gandhi actually appeared in prelims. But just 2 years back in 2018, we celebrated 200 years, the birth anniversary of Karl Marx, and 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. In 2020, UPSC asked a question and people were wondering where did this question come from. So, someone's death, instead of expressing remorse or grief on those great personalities, somehow we tend to look at those personalities and their death as very important for the examination. This is the extent to which we have become rational. It becomes very difficult for me not to invoke the spirit of Max Weber, who once said, the fate of our times is characterized by intellectualization and rationalization, and above all, by disenchantment of the modern world. We are no longer enchanted with values, emotions. We have become completely practical. Okay, to the point. Exam के हिसाब से क्या है? Okay. So anyway, right now I'm pursuing MPhil and PhD, integrated MPhil PhD at JNU, Center for Study of Social System, the same social system which was coined by Talcott Parson, and Yogendra Singh is one of the founders of the Center for Study of Social System, and he was a Parsonian scholar. Okay, so that justifies how it actually became Center for the Study of Social System and not sociology. See, students often ask me, sir, what is sociological perspective? ये sociological perspective होता क्या है? I'll explain what is sociological perspective, but before that, it is very important for you to understand how do we utilize this time, specifically this time, until UPSC comes up with the declaration of prelim result. How do we utilize this much amount of time that we have in our hand right now? देखो, बात बड़ी सीधी सी है. मुद्दे की बात मैं अगर तुम्हें बताऊं, अगर तुम लोगों ने यूपीएससी के प्रीलिम के रिजल्ट होने से पहले तक अपना सोशियोलॉजी खत्म नहीं किया तो बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगी तुम लोगों के लिए. दैट इज वाई एवरी ईयर आई रिक्वेस्ट ऑल माई स्टूडेंट्स टू कवर द सोशियोलॉजी एज मच एज दे वॉन्ट टू. ओके, until they get satisfied. Okay, as much as they want to, until UPSC comes up with the before at least before the declaration of UPSC prelim results. Now the question is, how do we do this? How can it be possible? We have roughly approximately 30 or 40 odd days before us to complete the given syllabus of sociology. How do we do it? It's very simple. See, if you join a test series, it will automatically push you beyond your limits. And not just push you beyond your limits, it will also help you to get those extra stuff that you are looking for on Google or on Yojana magazine or on Kurukshetra. So automatically, once you join a test series, you automatically get into that rhythm of studying, okay, and studying something which is required for the examination. And not just examination, it will also help you to gain certain edge over other students, specifically when you attend the discussion classes and get to know the concept that you have never ever explored in your whole life. And more so, test series will also help you to add contemporary touch to your answers, something which students often try to find on Google. You know, the first thing, sociological perspective, which I wanted to explain, comes handy here. You know, when you have that perspective in your head, you do not need to search on Google. You simply need to express it on the paper. And how do you express it? You need to get into the fold of answer writing right now, without thinking how would my answer would look like to the other person who's going to evaluate it. ये सारे consciousness जो है अपनी खत्म करो. The more and the sooner you get yourself evaluated before UPSC evaluates you, the more beneficial it will turn out to be for your preparation. I have planned to, show some slides to you, which I believe may help you to understand what sociological perspective is all about. So to begin with, I'll start off with the first thing, that is sociological perspective itself. So the question is, what is sociological perspective? See, if you look closely on the first row, you will see the binary between work and play. This is something that I want to want you to understand through this diagram, how we have evolved as societies. Okay. So if you look closely into the first picture, you will see the primitive society. How we conceive or how do we conceptualize primitive society as? Okay, this is what represents that kind of society. At that point of time, what was the meaning of work? How did we used to contextualize work? How did we used to conceptualize work? Work at that point of time was limited to hunting, gathering, or plucking the fruits from the tree, or even fishing. Okay. And somehow, work and the boundary between work and play, okay, were very much blurred. Okay. It was not very easy to delineate the boundary of work from the play. How else would you explain people domesticating the same animals and playing with them and eating the same animal for their dinner? So the animals which they used to play with in the afternoon, they used to kill the same animal for their dinner. So that way, the boundaries between work and play were very much blurred. Karl Marx, who's a very important scholar, and he argues that work is one domain. Work presents us a site through which a man would express his creativity. The only thing that differentiates man from the animal is that he is a working animal, and it is through work that he would express his creativity, his laboring power, his productivity, and his expression. So for example, a painter, when he paints any sketch or he makes any diagram, that creativity is nothing but his work. This is how he is earning his livelihood. So through sketches and through different kind of crafts that he is making, he is trying to express his creativity. So this is something which differentiates a man from the animal. Now, this imagery of man that Marx had made in his mind, that man is a working animal, is known as Homo faber, in the sense that he considers man as a working animal. For him, this is what man is and how he is different from animal. He is a Homo faber. And since work and play were not differentiated at that point of time, that is why he talks about total man. Man was total in the sense that for him work and play were very much synonymous to one another. Okay, intermingled with one another. As we gradually moved further, what happened? I'll skip directly to the Industrial Revolution, 1750 onwards. What happened was that the boundaries between work and play got very much delineated, got very much segregated. Now work was public sphere. Okay, work was confined to the public. Work actually became segregated to the public domain. Okay, and private domain represented play or emotion or love. Okay, so there was a clear division between work and play or public and private. And but this, just to enlighten you on this fact, that this division was not just a division of labor. Okay, it was also a sexual division of labor, since in the public sphere it was the men who were involved in the work, and in the private sphere it was the women who were relegated to the emotional care and support that she used to give to the man, who once he's done with his work would come back to home and get refreshed after having dinner with her wife or having sweet talk with her wife. That's how the women were represented initially, as someone who would give emotional support or caring support or love to the laboring or productive man who's coming after slogging for hours together to his home. Okay. Now, in this industrial revolution, if you look closely into this, you will see that it actually represented the assembly line system. Okay. An assembly line system was mainly introduced in order to have mass production. That way, man who was a creative being, man who was productive being, man who could express his creativity through his notion of work, as what Karl Marx argues as representing homo faber conception, that same man and his creativity was reduced to something that today we would call as monotonous and repetitive task. In the sense, look at these people. They are working on the sewing machines continuously for 7 or 8 hours together. Without expressing their creativity, they are doing something which they have been instructed to do so. So that way, the man who was a creative self, man who was a productive self, he is simply following the instructions given to him by the boss, so-called bourgeoisie, the owner of the means of production. So that's how different class came into existence. I did not talk about feudal society, ancient society voluntarily because I really want to keep it short. Okay. Now the man is simply doing the repetitive and monotonous task. That's where his notion of alienation comes from. In the sense that he is being alienated from his productive and creative self, and now he is not doing what he really wants to do or what he enjoys doing, but he is actually doing something which he has been asked to do so. Okay, continuously and repetitively and monotonously. Skip directly to the third image. You will see people working in the call center. Okay. But can you see that people working in the call center and people here working in the so-called assembly line system actually, which seems to be different from one another, actually represent a pattern. You will see the same people working just like they used to work in the assembly line system. So that way, call center or the service industry represent nothing but a modern form of assembly line system, where every man is actually doing the same task, but in a so-called sophisticated manner. Now they have white collar, they do not have blue collar around them anymore. So they would talk in a very sophisticated manner, they would speak in a very soft English, they would sound very caring and emotional. How, sir, how may I help you, etc., something like this. Okay. So but this is also a white collar alienation. This is also alienation because imagine आपका झगड़ा हुआ है आपकी वाइफ के साथ या फिर आपके गर्लफ्रेंड के साथ, ठीक है, या फिर आपके हस्बैंड के साथ या बॉयफ्रेंड के साथ, लेकिन आप जब जॉब में जा रहे हो तो आपको क्या बोलना है, हेलो सर, हाउ मे हेल्प यू. तो यू विल प्रेजेंट अ स्माइल to the customer. You that way are performing emotional labor, which is actually more rigorous than the physical labor, since you have to overcome the stress and strain that you might have gone through after fighting with your close ones. And you have to manifest an image which is quite different, and you have to be very rational in the work. You cannot be emotional. Okay. Anyway, now let us come directly to the last image. What does it represent? This is the question that I'm posing here. And then I'll talk about briefly about the things that I've discussed so far. It represents the modern man, the social media man. All of us are engaged in Facebook, WhatsApp, checking each other messages and replying to someone very special or someone who's very important from the perspective of work. Okay. So that way we may be thinking that we are engaged in having some time pass, or we are simply doing some entertainment. Some of us are listening to the songs, or some of us are simply browsing through internet or surfing web pages. But do you know that in the garb of play, all of us are actually doing work? You know, internet, something which I am going to argue here, internet has actually emerged as the modern sense of play school and work factory, something that a common sense cannot think of. I'll explain you how. You know, when you are surfing on internet, every minute you are giving some data to the other person. You are telling him your likes, your dislikes. You're telling him the kind of food that you like, the kind of websites that you like, the kind of dress that you like, the kind of furniture that you want to purchase. You're actually feeding the information that is very sacred to you, something which you consider as very private information to you, okay, in the garb of which we often talk about privacy. But you know, all these things once entered, all these things actually become a data for the company. And then next day they would, tell you, would you like to buy this, something that you were looking for? Is this the same thing? So that way you are actually working for the companies, but you are not able to realize this. This is what Christian folks, a modern Marxist, would call as digital labor. Something that all of us do not recognize, but somehow unconsciously we are performing it. So what I'm saying is that from the primitive conception of work, okay, where the boundary between work and play were very much blurred, to the manual labor, so-called blue-collar workers, to the emotional labor, so-called white-collar workers, and to the digital labor, so-called collarless workers. This is how the notion of work has evolved. Now the thing is, at one point of time, we were producers. Second point of time, we became consumers. Initially, the boundary between work and play, as I told you, were blurred. So that way we were both producers and consumers. Here, gradually, the boundary between work and play got segregated. Some people became producers and some people became consumers. Like, for example, sexual division of labor that I just talked about. Men became producers. The entities of which were the things which were being consumed by not just only men but also by women, since it was considered that women were not fit for the industrial activities. So that is why they were looked at through the perspective of consumption, and they were therefore deemed as unproductive labor, okay, simply made for consumption, and the men being productive who is slogging for hours together in the industry. Okay. Now third picture, again production and consumption, but when you talk about the last image, the digital labor that all of us are doing, you will see that we are not just producer or consumers, rather we have become what George Ritzer would call as prosumers. Prosumers, which is a mix of both producer and consumer. Okay. So when Marx talks about class division in societies, he believed that in primitive society there were no classes. Okay. And with the advancement in means of production, relation of production, something which I don't want to explain it right here, because this is not a class, okay, this is just a presentation on the things that you should understand in order to acquire, in order to get yourself acquainted with sociological perspective. Okay, so basically Marx believed that in primitive society there was no conception of rich and poor. Everybody were equal, everybody was equal, okay, everybody were doing similar tasks and there was no hierarchy. Okay, but when you talk about the industrial revolution, Marx would say that somehow people have become divided on economic lines. There is one group which owns the factory and who he called as bourgeoisie. Okay, the people who own the means of production, and specifically means of production during the industrial society was the industry itself. And the other people who do not own the means of production but who have only their labor to sell to the industrialists, these people were called as proletariats. But you know, Christian folks, who's a modern Marxist, he would say that today, approximately 200 years after the Industrial Revolution, there is a new kind of class which is emerging. The class which does not even realize that they are working for the corporate sector, and they believe that you know, they are engaged in playful activity, or they are simply doing time pass on internet, or watching Netflix, or buying some commodity through internet, okay, through different sites like Amazon or Myntra, etc. But you know, at the end of the day, all of them are actually doing labor, because all of them are giving certain data to the company, which is being processed by the company and would help you to shape your choices. You are actually doing it very easy for the companies. Okay, so this is digital labor that we perform every day, and this particular class is known as cybertariat. It is not proletariat, it is cybertariat according to Christian Fuchs. Okay, now so basically what I wanted to tell you was how, you know, I define sociological perspective as, not just me, how Zygmunt Bauman and other different classical scholars and modern neo-Marxist scholars also define sociological perspective as, they would say that the things which seem to be very different from one another, like for example, if you look closely into these pictures, you will see that all of them are very much different from one another. दिखने में लगता है कि सब के सब चारों अलग हैं, but in seemingly different images, you will see a pattern, the underlying pattern, which actually puts all these images in one line. And that is the pattern of the evolution of work and the conception or the subsequent changes in the classes, the different kind of classes or different kind of labor that is evolving, like from example, manual labor to emotional labor to digital labor. Right? Now, let me come to the second aspect of sociological perspective. Okay, let me talk about religion and nation. See, किसी से मैं पूछूं रिलीजन क्या होता है, वो बोलेगा रिलीजन हिंदुइज्म, क्रिश्चियनिटी, बुद्धिज्म, ये ऐसा, ये है रिलीजन उनके लिए. बट इफ आई आस्क एंड इफ आई टेल समवन दैट इंडिया इज अ रिलीजन, वो बोलेंगे हैं ये क्या बोल रहा है भाई तू, इंडिया इज अ रिलीजन, इंडिया नेशन है, रिलीजन थोड़ा ना है. You know, the thing is, what I want to tell you here is this, that what religion used to do at one point of time, that same thing is being done by nation. So that way nation is nothing but modern form of religion. Now you would ask me how. Simply मैं एक चीज बताता हूँ. Again ये इमेज देखो, यहाँ पे तुम्हें दिखेंगे ट्राइबल लोग जिनके हाथों में कुछ टैटू बने हुए हैं. टैटू, ये टैटू पता नहीं क्या सिग्निफाई करते हैं तुम्हारे लिए, बट यू नो डरखाइम, a sociologist, would call these tattoo as totem. Totem means a symbol, a sign, you know, a sign of unity. जैसे for example, imagine the people who are holding national flag in their hands. What does it represent? It is nothing but actually a representation of the shared sense of identity, that all of us are one. All the people who are holding that so-called national flag belong to one and the same community, and cutting across different regional identities, all of them are one and sharing this psychological unity. Similarly, the same thing was actually being done by the so-called tattoos and totems in the primitive society. The people who had these totems imprinted on their hands, these totems actually represented that all of them, irrespective of how they look like or how different they are from one another, actually share a shared identity, that all of them are one. That is tribal identity, which is a homogeneous identity. Okay, you know, let me come directly or jump directly to the French Revolution. In the first slide I talked about industrial revolution. In the second slide I would talk about French Revolution. What actually happened in French Revolution? Somehow people questioned religion. This is what happened in French Revolution. Not just in French Revolution, this was something that was happening even before that. Like for example, in you know, if I were to talk about Renaissance, scientific revolution, or Enlightenment, the only thing that was common across these seemingly different events or phenomena was their questioning spirit, the spirit through which they questioned the religion. Okay, somehow they believed कि नहीं, ये जो तुम्हारा क्या कहते हैं, अर्थ नहीं है सेंटर में, सन है सेंटर में, अर्थ रिवॉल्व करता है. लेकिन किसको लगता था कि अर्थ है सेंटर में? ये जो चर्च थी, जो प्रीस्टली क्लास थी, क्लर्जी क्लास थी, somehow they believed कि नहीं, अर्थ है सेंटर में और सन रिवॉल्व करता है उसके अराउंड. But you know, these things were not based on any experiment or scientificity. Somehow people who believe that these things are very random and somehow does not hold any veracity, those people questioned religious class. And the question not came only from the scientists but also came from the intellectuals of those times, the people who are generally regarded as the founders of the Enlightenment era, like for example Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau. All these people, Voltaire, Thomas Paine, all these people actually questioned the significance of religion in the social world. Like for example, before French Revolution, the order of our society was, our society means French society, okay, I'll come back to our society as well in a short while. Order of the French society during that point was based on religious notion. Like in the first strata of the society, clergy class was situated. It was given the maximum privilege. Okay. In the second strata was the nobility, which we often call as kings or dukes or earls or lords. In the third strata were the common people. Now, if you look closely into the Indian society caste structure, you will see the similar kind of hierarchical division. In the first strata, who are there? Brahmins. In the second strata, who are there? Kshatriyas, which are equivalent to the warriors and kings of the pre-French revolutionary society. Okay, and in the third strata are Vaishyas and Shudra, who were regarded at one point of time as common people, common masses, just very much equivalent to the third estate of the French Revolution, which encapsulated the common masses. How else would you explain the top two caste people like Brahmin and Kshatriya being regarded as Dvija, twice born, and the next two are regarded as the common people. Somehow they were given more privileges. Okay, so similarly, in seemingly different society there was a commonality, that religion actually helped to maintain a social order and social division in the society. Okay, now what happened was that in France, or specifically in Europe, which was a homogeneous society at that point of time, since there was no globalization, so obviously it was a very homogeneous society. Globalization से होता क्या है, लोग यहाँ से वहाँ आते जाते रहते हैं. What do we mean by globalization? Globalization simply means a flow of goods, people and services across different nation states and territories. तो उस टाइम तो फ्लो था ही नहीं, इतना तो नहीं था, कम से कम मास लेवल पे नहीं था, तो इसलिए होमोजेनिटी मेंटेन्ड थी वहां पर, एक ही टाइप के लोग रहते थे. इसलिए मैंने यहाँ पे चर्च का साइन दिखाया, रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा हूं मैं उसको, उस टाइम को. ओके, नाउ व्हाट डज दिस साइन church, let me come back to the topic, then I'll explain all those things in a while. What does this cross symbol represent? It represents nothing. It represents the same thing which was actually being represented by these totems. This totem यानी taboo, sorry not taboo but tattoo. Okay, एक जैसे लगते हैं सुनने में, इसलिए मुंह से निकल गया गलती से. अब देखो बात सीधी सी है, ये जो टैटूज हैं अगर तुम इनको देखोगे तो ये एक उनके अंदर एक वो फील दिलाते हैं कि भाई हम एक जैसे हैं. ओके, शेयर्ड सेंस ऑफ आइडेंटिटी है, हमारी कलेक्टिव कॉन्शियसनेस है. बट यहाँ पे अगर आप देखोगे चर्च के इस क्रॉस को, तो आपको पता चलेगा कि ये भी वो ही कर रहे हैं. somehow they believe that all of us are one, since all of us are Christian or Catholics. So somehow this symbol is doing exactly what these symbols were doing in the tribal society or in the primitive society. Now check out this image, third one. You will see different small young children holding this national flag and being very proud of it. Okay, do you know they are not actually holding any cross sign or some Om sign or any religious symbol. They are holding a tricolor flag. A tricolor flag. What does it represent? Again, it represents the same thing, the same feeling of psychological unity. Now, one of them may be a Brahmin, second one may be a Kshatriya, third one may be Vaishya, fourth one may be Shudra, but somehow all of them are united only because of this shared sense of identity, that irrespective of our primordial differences or ascribed features, all of us share this one identity, that is Indian. So that is why I said India or nation is nothing but modern form of religion itself, because when religion was questioned during those times, in the Enlightenment era, we required something at that point of time to homogenize the people once again. At that point of time, religion actually managed to put people seemingly different from one another in one place. Now, what is that one thing which can replace religion and put the order again in the equilibrium phase? That is why nation state, the idea of nation state was conceptualized. So, but unfortunately, the fact is that the same sense of nationalism amongst us, that is, the conception of psychological unity amongst all of us, irrespective of our or beyond the notions of religion, caste, gender, sexuality, that psychological unity that binds all of us together in one thread, that is nationalism. Somehow, this nationalism in itself was responsible for the conception of modern state, the territorial sovereign state. Okay, but somehow today, unfortunately, this state is dictating us how to be nationalist. Okay, so basically, from voluntary nationalism to the state sponsored nationalism, otherwise you may be declared as anti-nationalist or urban Naxalite, the kind of labels which are given to the people who seem to be deviants from the so-called conformed notions of being a nationalist, actually make the state dictatorial in nature. So this is one glimpse of the religion and nation thing that I would explain, okay, further when I talk about when I talk about these things in detail in the foundation course. Now the third is capitalism and socialism. Few terms which we have been listening to since childhood. Most of the people do not really even understand the basic differences between these seemingly different economic ideologies. होता है, हम बचपन से बोलते हैं कैपिटलिस्ट सोशलिस्ट, कैपिटलिस्ट को हम बोलते हैं बड़ा खराब है खराब है खराब है, ऐसा वी आर एक्चुअली indoctrinated into believing that capitalism is a very bad system. It represents the greed of a class, that is a bourgeois class, which is trying to appropriate the surplus value of the labor and the labor is not being paid what is worth. Okay, what is his worth? Okay, like for example, a phone which would cost approximately 40,000. A labor process was involved in the manufacturing of this phone, but when this phone you buy from the market, it will cost you approximately 40,000. But what is the amount which is being given to the laborer in exchange of that? He is given only 2,000 rupees. Now the question is, where is that 38,000 amount? The Marxists would say somehow it has been appropriated by the bourgeoisie class, and that's how we can explain the concentration of capital at the upper level and the subsequent class inequality, which is the contemporary discourse of the world, and which is something that is being published by Oxfam report every year. Now, coming back to the capitalism and socialism thing, I asked few days back one of my students, is China a capitalist society, socialist society, or a communist society? Very simple question, right? Very simple question. He said China is a communist society. The fact is that China is a capitalist state with a socialist facade and run by Communist Party. So capitalist state having socialist facade is like Adam Smith wearing the suit of Karl Marx. You would not be able to differentiate capitalism and socialism in empirical reality. Somehow those boundaries get blurred again. Okay. How would you explain? How else would you explain China expanding its empire just like the way the emperors used to do so in the ancient times? China today is expanding its empire through initiatives like One Belt, One Road, String of Pearls, and putting itself into multilateral institutional arrangements. That explains the capitalist tendency. Why? Because somehow China, when you look into the domestic economy of China, you will see the millions of people who are not really certain about what lies in the future for them. Not in the future, even they are not really sure or certain about their tomorrow. Millions of people die of hunger, poverty, unemployment, and at the surface it seems it is expanding its empire. So it is capitalism actually which can explain the stark differences between few people who are contributing to the economy and the few people who are dying of hunger and poverty. Okay, but the same economy is being governed by the communist state. You know, the fact is why I'm saying communist party actually, communist party, uh, because somehow when Marx talks about communism, Marx talks about a communist society. He never talked about communist state. What we have today all over the world in the name of communist state are actually not the same communist societies which were envisioned by Karl Marx. Now you would ask me, how is communist society different from communist state? When Marx talks about communist society, he talks about stateless society. But what we have today are North Korean state communist party. Okay, China communist party ruling a socialist state. It is not a stateless society and having a capitalist economy. So is the case with Cuba and Russia. These powers, okay, these economic powers, have somehow managed to distribute the resources not as equitably as Marx would have envisaged, but somehow they have not been able to distribute the power, which is also a very crucial resource that should have been distributed among the people as well. Somehow the power has been concentrated, among the few elites which are visible across seemingly different nation states like North Korea, Cuba, China. And this is something which can be which also explain how democracy, which actually looks very vibrant and very healthy and very liberating, is actually, for example, if I were to talk about Indian democracy, somehow you would be surprised to know that the Indian democracy is not so much different from the Chinese communist parties or the socialist state, because at the end of the day, India was also being governed for 70 long years by the Congress regime, the Congress system, as Rajni Kothari calls it as. So that explains how power was concentrated in the hands of few. So, it seems at the surface that we are a democracy, but inside, if you look, you will see autocrats, displaying the facade of democracy. So, and when you talk about capitalism and socialism, there is one scholar, John Kenneth Galbraith. He once said, under capitalism, man exploits man, and under communism or socialism, it is just the opposite. Now, when I said it is just the opposite, it may seem to you that capitalism and socialism are very much opposite, in the sense that socialism is a socialist state in its true sense of the term, which means a welfare-centric state, whereas capitalism is exploitative and profit-centric venture. But Galbraith is saying, under capitalism, man exploits man. Man exploits man. Under socialism, it is just the opposite, which means here again, man is exploiting man himself, but not economically only, also politically, because the power is now limited in the hands of few. Okay, so that way there is no difference between these seemingly two different ideologies. At the end of the day, both are governed by bureaucracy and few elites. Okay, so this is sociological perspective that I wanted to explain you on. Now, I'll be talking about the second most important facet of this video, which is factual questions, the kind of questions that UPSC has been asking. Specifically, you can put aside all the kind of question paper that UPSC has posed to you or has asked questions from you on, okay, like from 2013 to 2017, all the papers were on the one side, and from 2017 onwards, the paper quality somehow got, very different. The kind of questions that UPSC has been asking over the last 2 or 3 years are very much different from the kind of question that UPSC has asked till 2017. For example, Look at the kind of questions that UPSC has asked over the last 2-3 years. Fetishism of commodities. I don't want to explain you these things for the time being. I just want people to get enlightened, since the fact is that it is often repeatedly argued that one should always go through the previous year question papers, but students are very much reluctant to pick up the question paper. Somehow they feel that no, they simply want to study from somewhere. कुछ भी दे दो, बस हमें कुछ आर्टिकल दे दो, कुछ कंटेम्प्रेरी दे दो, कोई बुक का नाम दे दो जिसे हम पढ़ लें. पहले उससे कंटेम्प्रेरी जो प्रीवियस ईयर पेपर है 2-3, वो देखना बड़ा जरूरी है. लोग बोलते हैं कि प्रीलिम्स का जो पैटर्न है बड़ा अजीब सा हो गया है, कुछ भी पूछ रहे. मैं तुम्हें सीधा बता देता हूँ. When you will see questions in prelims, you will see a pattern coming out of it. Specifically, if you try to look into the past 3 previous year prelim papers, you will see a pattern emerging out of it, and the name of that pattern is sustainability. Sustainability. Why did I say this? See the kind of question that UPSC is asking. Biochar, biofuel, social cost of carbon, artificial intelligence. These questions are not so, I did not really get surprised when I looked at these questions, because last 3 paper clearly reflect I could really anticipate the kind of questions that were going to come this year, and that is why I say that the pattern is actually the same pattern. The coaching institutions did not teach those things. That is a very different thing. Okay, I'm not going to get into those details. Okay, those are irrelevant. But you are kindly requested to understand the kind of pattern that UPSC has been asking questions on. So is the case with optional paper, and specifically sociology. Sociology that way is no exception to that pattern. If you look into the past 2-3 year papers of sociology, you will see a pattern emerging out of it. For example, in 2018 and 19, UPSC asked these questions which it has never ever asked before in its history. Fetishism of commodities, a concept given by Karl Marx, was never ever asked by UPSC, although the same question I asked in my last year test series, and you can cross check the same thing, and you can also check my question papers. You will see that many of the questions which seem very different to you actually were asked in my test paper itself, test series also. Okay, so fetishism of commodity, something which I often teach to my foundation course students in a very simplified manner. Reserve army of labor, again a Marxian concept. Third, limits of the working day, again a Marxian concept. Labor commitment, again coming from Marxian writings. Patriarchal bargain. Patriarchal bargain is a feminine concept. It's a feminist concept. It's given by a scholar known as Deniz Kendiyothi, a Turkish sociologist. Okay. Now, people may wonder, where did UPSC ask this question from? Now, see, since I have done higher studies in sociology, this is one concept which we were taught when we were doing MA in sociology. That means somehow, the traditional notion that the level of sociology paper is over and above the bachelor's and below master's, that conventional notion does not hold any water. UPSC can ask anything from anywhere. It is expected of you to at least know the meaning of the concepts which are taught at the MA level. So we won't be going into the details of those things, but at least we should be aware of the concepts, very unique concepts, okay, which you do not use in your everyday life and are very important through sociological perspective. Okay, so patriarchal bargain is one concept. The next is discrete caste and muddled hierarchy. Again, a concept, a very specific concept given by Dipankar Gupta, who is an Indian sociologist, a pass out from JNU, very eminent sociologist of our contemporary time. He's still alive. Okay, that automatically makes him more important. Where did UPSC ask this question from? See, as far as Indian sociology is concerned, I'll tell you by the end of this lecture that most of the questions that UPSC is asking these days from Indian sociology are directly picked, lifted, directly borrowed and sourced from EPW, Economic and Political Weekly magazine, which is a weekly magazine, and I often share the most important and relevant articles from the same magazine to my students. Gone are the days when UPSC would ask you simple question on Andre Bete on caste, or Andre Bete on class, or M.N. Srinivas on dominant caste or Sanskritization. Gone are those days. At least as far as section A and B are concerned, to some extent they are still very much repetitive. But as far as section C is concerned, it is the most dynamic part of the paper 2, and it is that section which adds the dynamism to the paper 2. And somehow people are not really aware of the source which should be referred to get a grip or hold over that dynamic part. And that is why I often recommend my students to read and understand Economic and Political Weekly. I often share those articles with them. Now next is Ranjit Guha subaltern approach. If you look closely into your syllabus, you will see paper 2 specifically I am talking about here, because it is often ignored by many teachers. If you look closely into paper 2, you will see our section A has 3 different perspectives on Indian society. One is Marxian perspective. Marxian perspective to study Indian society, specifically Indian national movement, was also studied through a Marxist perspective by different scholars, like one of them which is given in your syllabus is A.R. Desai, and also a contemporary like Sumit Sarkar has also done a Marxist study on the Indian national movement. What does it mean to study Indian national movement through Marxist lens? This is something which I'll be dealing with in my foundation course. This is not something I'm here for. Okay. But second perspective which is given in your syllabus is Indological perspective. Okay. Which is generally considered as a perspective on India by the Indians, not by the colonials. Okay. Generally, India has been a subject of study by the colonials as well. How else would you explain, all Occident and the Orient, this division which occurs in the Orientalist version of history. Okay. And the third is, other than Marxist and Indological perspective, the third perspective which is equally important is structural functional perspective. So these 3 perspectives are given explicitly in your syllabus, but the question was asked on subaltern perspective, and that too of a very specific scholar, Ranjit Guha. Now you may wonder, where did this question come from? As I told you, these are few things which are generally taught at the MA level. At the MA level. And it is not that you have to do MA in order to get these things covered. My ambition and my target is to make sure that no student read even a single book. Trust me, and most of the students who have studied from me, they know that I have never ever suggested even a single book. My notes are more than sufficient, and whatever I teach is completely in line with and is in sync with the current affairs. I make sure that students are able to generate that capacity to look at the things around them in a sociological fashion. Now, next is, as far as subaltern perspective is concerned, there are 2 more scholars in subaltern perspective. One is B.R. Ambedkar, our own Ambedkar, and the second is David Hardiman, who is a Pakistani sociologist. Okay. So subaltern means, what does it mean to have a subaltern perspective? Subaltern basically means perspective from the bottom of society. If you look into Indian history, or for that matter any history like French history or European history or any American history, you will see that most of the history has been written from the perspective of the people who are situated at the highest rungs of the society. Colonials have written history of the people who have been subjected to the exploitation of those colonials themselves. Okay, so that is why Karl Marx argued that history has so far been projected as the history of kings and queens, but the fact is history is nothing but history of class struggle, like from master and slaves to lords and serfs and to bourgeois and proletariat, and then finally this struggle will end, and that will be known as the end of history, classless society. Subaltern perspective simply means to study the society from the perspective of the people who have been ignored, like tribal people, women people, Dalits, Adivasis, okay, or Muslims. To study the society from the perspective of these marginalized people is known as subaltern perspective. Okay. Now next is new middle class. Again, a very unique concept. Most of you may be aware of this concept, but for those students who are not aware of new middle class is a specific category in the Indian society. Okay, although this category exists even in the European society, but the time scale is very much different. Here the new middle class emerged after 90s LPG reforms. The class which is very much present in the BPOs or the service centers. Okay, most of the people who are employed in the service sector today represent the new middle. It is a very ambitious class, a class which Amartya Sen has also talked about, the argumentative Indian. We are अभी हमारे कोई बिल आएगा खाना खाते हुए तो बोलेंगे ये किस बात का पैसा लगाया तुमने, ज्ञान देंगे हम उसको, कौन से रूल के हिसाब से तुम हमारा चलान काट रहे हो, ये है न्यू मिडिल इंडियन मिडिल क्लास. ठीक है. Now next is life chances and lifestyle. Life chance, life chance, when you look closely into the definition of class given by Max Weber, you will see that Max Weber defines, unlike Karl Marx, he defines class as a group of people having similar position in the market situation. Okay, इसका मतलब क्या है कि भले मैं टीचर हूं, तुम बैंकर हो और तीसरा मैनेजर है. ओके, मार्केट सिचुएशन में हम तीनों दिखने में अलग है बट सिमिलर पोजीशन है हमारी तीनों की. You cannot hierarchically divide these seemingly different people like teacher, banker and manager. You cannot say that one is over and above the other in hierarchy. All of them are sharing almost similar position in terms of economy. All of them are earning almost similar in that scale, that way. So basically class is a group of people having similar position in the market situation. यानी कि पैसे कमाने के मामले में हम सब की similar position है, मैनेजर, बैंकर और टीचर की, और इवन IAS ऑफिसर भी जो है that is equivalent to university professor. Okay, so class is a group of people having similar position in the market situation by the virtue of which they enjoy equal life chances. Equal life chances का मतलब क्योंकि वो almost similar कमा रहे हैं अलग होने के बावजूद भी, तो इसलिए उनकी जो जनरेशन होगी अगली या उनकी खुद की जो जनरेशन होगी, they would be able to afford almost similar kind of privileges, like all of them would be having some kind of social security in terms of health or in terms of education or in terms of pension or insurance. All of them would be able to afford the basic necessity, what they consider as basic necessity. Okay, so all of them would be able to enjoy or afford the public goods like education and health, etc., all those things. Okay, lifestyle, where does this word come from? Again, this word is a Weberian term which is implicit in his notion of status group. Status group, like the people who are the gated communities, like president, वो सबसे आइसोलेटेड रहते हैं, सबसे अलग, प्राइम मिनिस्टर, ओके, लाइक, और द क्वीन ऑफ इंग्लैंड, ये सबसे अलग दिखते हैं हम सब कॉमन मासेस से, एकदम आइसोलेटेड, सबसे मिलते नहीं है, एक्सक्लूडेड, अब सेल्फ एक्सक्लूजन में ही रहते हैं, अपने आप को एक्सक्लूड करके रखते हैं. ओके, these people have a very unique lifestyle which is not enjoyed by the common people. You cannot earn that lifestyle just by earning millions or billions. That lifestyle will be very different. If you see जैसे लक्ष्मी मित्तल हैं, आर्सलर मित्तल के जो मालिक हैं, लक्ष्मी मित्तल भी जब क्वीन ऑफ इंग्लैंड से मिलते हैं तो क्वीन ऑफ इंग्लैंड भी ग्लव पहन के उसका हाथ मिलाती है उससे, जबकि वो ही इज कंसिडर्ड एज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट रिचेस्ट पीपल ऑन द प्लैनेट अर्थ. हाथ ग्लव्स से पहन, जो कि ग्लव्स एक आम आदमी नहीं पहनते. एक स्टेटस सिंबल आता है उनका, एक वो जो प्रिविलेज है उनकी, वो गार्ड्स से आती है जो उनके पास है, जो पैलेस है उनके पास. ये कॉमन एवरीडे लाइफ में किसी आम आदमी के पास नहीं होता है. ओके, so the question was asked on life chances and the differences between life chance and lifestyle. Okay, next, sociological imagination is a concept that every university course would begin with. हर यूनिवर्सिटी इस दुनिया में सबसे पहला कोर्स जब शुरू करती है सोशियोलॉजी का, पहला लेक्चर सोशियोलॉजिकल इमेजिनेशन में होता है. और ये कोई ऐसी वैसी चीज नहीं है कि सोशियोलॉजिकल इमेजिनेशन मींस इमेजिनिंग सोशियोलॉजिकली, नहीं. इट इज अ कॉन्सेप्ट गिवन बाय एन अमेरिकन सोशियोलॉजिस्ट चार्ल्स राइट मिल्स, हु बिलीव्ड दैट Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emile Durkheim, all of them who are the principal architect of modernity, although having different ideas from one another, all of them had this one unique thing to them which is known as sociological imagination, that all of them had this capacity to look at the case which seems to be individual from the perspective of social. Somehow they believe it is the largest social forces which is responsible for the suffering to the individual. So the cause of suffering is not limited to the individual himself, it is only because of the larger social forces. For example, let me give you one example. सुसाइड हम बोलते हैं, सुशांत सिंह राजपूत का सुसाइड हुआ, ठीक है, हम बोलेंगे कि उसकी कुछ अपनी प्रॉब्लम थी, मेंटल इश्यूज थे, ड्रग था, ये था, वो था, उसकी फैमिली इश्यूज थे, पैसा नहीं था उसके पास, जो भी. Somehow we tend to explain the suicide which seems to be very individualistic phenomena in a very psychological manner. In the sense, we try to reduce it to the level of individual himself. But the fact is, Durkheim would say, a sociologist who has conducted a study on suicide, and Church and C. Wright Mills believe that he has this sociological imagination. So Durkheim would say that the cause of suicide is actually not limited to individual, rather it is actually because of the larger social force of integration and regulation. Somehow the force of integration has weakened in the modern societies. People have become more concerned about money than relations, and when they see money is not given to them, or when they see that their hard work is not being rewarded appropriately, somehow they feel disconnected with the uh, people who they once considered as their close ones. So somehow the sense of integration becomes very low. With the rise of feminism, the sense of integration between men and women has also weakened. This may also explain how people are becoming more and more individualistic. They do not feel attachment with one another. How else would you explain rising cases of divorce and increasing rate or instances of live-in relationship, and people losing their faith in the so-called sacred institution called as marriage? Okay, anyway, these things are a few things which I'll be explaining in my classes, so इस पे मैं डिटेल में नहीं जाऊंगा. And so the next concept is intersectionality. What is intersectionality? एक women है, in comparison to a man, generally it is considered that woman is discriminated. Okay, generally she is situated at the marginalized position. Okay, and that explains the extent to which she is not given any entitlement to the power position, or she is also often deprived of education or different kind of job opportunities. Okay, and it also explains why women are often underrepresented at the level of power structures, whether it is parliament or even at the Panchayati Raj systems. Okay, which Amartya Sen often calls phenomena known as missing women. Okay, women are missing at these level, whether it is education or whether it is power structure, whether it is any job opportunity. Okay, and even in the job structure you will see a glass ceiling. But this is only a discrimination happening at the level of gender. Her regional identity, that is from northeast, okay, and her class position, that is low class, and caste position, that is Dalit, and her gender, that is woman, which is often discriminated against in comparison to the man, you will see that she is located at the marginalized identity at all the social levels, and all these marginalized identities would add up to create an inequality of its own type, which is much more severe than the inequality in isolation to all these marginalized identities. This is what we often call as intersectionality, since she is located at the intersection of all the marginalized identities. This is a concept that was given by a black feminist woman known as Kimberly Crenshaw. Okay, so these things are, these are one of the few things that I'll be explaining in my foundation course, how these things are relevant to contemporary understanding of the evolution that is happening in the sociological discourse as well. And also then the next question is terrorism, a new form of asymmetrical warfare. Just like I explained you how nation is a new form of religion, similarly terrorism is also a new form of asymmetrical warfare. In order to address this question, first we should understand what is asymmetrical warfare. Okay, the next is collapse of functionalism and bankruptcy of Marxism coincide with the rupture of modernity. Now this question may seem very fancy and very heavy, or sophisticated to any person, but the fact is simply this question is asking you to criticize, only to criticize functionalism and to criticize Marxism. That's it. See, the students of sociology who have undergone the syllabus, they must be knowing that Marxism and functionalism emerged as a response to the modernity as a concept. Okay, when modernity emerged, a few people looked at modernity through a very radical perspective, one of them being Karl Marx, and from there on Marxism emerged. And few people believe that somehow the old society was really very good. Okay, somehow the traditional value, custom, all those things had bound us together in one thread, and we could we could feel that community sentiments which is now absent in the modern society, which is full of individualism and people committing crime, etc., all those things. What kind of society have we come into? Those people were known as conservative, and from there on emerged functionalist strand, okay, who believe that every institution like religion, family, okay, caste structure, or which may seem very conservative to you, all these things are actually having some function which is to bound different people together in one thread. Now, Karl Marx or Marxist or feminist may look at these structures as hierarchical or creating inequality, but somehow functionalists believe that these structures actually promote a stability or maintain the system or create equilibrium condition. Okay, so somehow, but these systems, whether it is functionalism or Marxism, both of these had to be criticized in this question, and you had to explain why these philosophies declined. At the end of the day, Marx believed that revolution would be coming, but revolution never came, despite world economies having gone through different kind of recessionary period, including 2008 subprime crisis and 1930 global depression crisis. And even if you look into the contemporary Indian society, you will see that the economy has gone down to, or the GDP has contracted to the level of minus 23%. Still, that same revolution is not coming. Rather, people have somehow become adjusted to the evolving condition in the economy, and the state seems to be somehow getting adapted to the changing economic environment or economic failures. Somehow, the same system is maintained. Revolutionary tendencies are diffused. Whenever someone would try to revolt against the state would label them as deviants or Naxalites or urban Naxalites, somehow projecting that to the public that this is what you do not have to become. And these people are punished and sent to jail, and some rules are passed against them, and then it is made to believe that this is what the normal order is. If anyone tries to deviate from these conformist notions of nationalism, this is what nationalism is. If you do not behave the way a nationalist should behave, then this is how you would be treated as. Okay, so somehow Marx believed that revolution would be coming, but revolution never actually came. So this is how you have to criticize functionalism and Marxism. Okay, some people would also say that we can also include postmodernism as a concept here to criticize both functionalism and Marxism. But what is relevant and what is not is something that we will be discussing in the test series itself. And the next part is interlinking of river. Now, people were wondering, how did this question, where did this question come from? See, the fact is, whether it is interlinking of river or any kind of development project, at the end of the day, you should think about the section where exactly you think the question would have come from. You have to think about that section. For example, if you look into your syllabus, you will see in section C there is a concept on development. Okay, there is a mention on development and social transformation in Indian society. Okay, from there this question was lifted, interlinking of rivers. In the sense, see, for example, if you are a DM, okay, and someone gives you a paper to sign on the dotted line, do you know that dotted line may represent modern development and heavy infrastructure establishment like road infrastructure or shopping mall or complexes, or even a big heavy hydel dam project. Okay, it may represent development to you, but the fact is what you think in terms of development is actually underdevelopment for the people. रुको. See, when you will become a DM, an IAS officer, and when someone would ask you to sign on the dotted line, now that sign on the dotted line may result into development of that particular district or that particular area. That development may be in terms of road, it may be in terms of health sector, it may be in terms of establishment of schools, it may be in terms of establishment of shopping mall and complexes, or it may be in terms of big heavy hydel dam projects. Okay, but remember that that sign on the dotted line may represent a development to you in these terms, but somehow the latent dysfunction of your sign on that dotted line is under development and displacement of the millions of the tribal people who are marginalized often in the name of development. So somehow these things, A rational man would not be so much concerned about the underdevelopment of those people, because at the end of the day, what we mean when we think of development is nothing but establishment of school, health, education, the modern sense of education, or the modern sense of health, or modern sense of infrastructure, okay, which may not be considered or deemed as development among the tribal people, who would have to suffer a lot only because of that particular sign. Okay, so anyway, I'll come to the discussion of these things when I'll be taking the test series discussion. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Again, you could have used the ideas of Gandhi, okay, here in order to address this question. And then demonetization, Narega, Right to Education Act, all these things are very contemporary. How do we address these questions? I have told multiple times to my students that if you read EPW, that is Economic and Political Weekly, which is a weekly magazine, you will realize that most of the questions, at least over the last 2-3 years, UPSC has been directly lifting, borrowing, heavily sourcing from that EPW magazine itself, where very well known and famous and eminent sociologists of the contemporary times write very often weekly. Like for example, Deepankar Gupta, whose concept discrete caste, as I told you, was directly lifted from the EPW itself. Ashish Bose, Demaru concept, not Bimaru state, but Demaru, that is daughter eliminating and or the tendency to promote a male child, a son meta preference. Okay, so these things are directly lifted from EPW magazine. This is something that students are not really aware of, and that is why I am here. I really want you, the students who are largely concerned about paper 2, to understand that EPW has become a very crucial source in contemporary sociological discourse in the UPSC mains examination. Okay, so the next thing, let me quickly jump to the next slide, and that would be important current issues. These are some of the important current issues which I feel one in one or the other form may appear in your UPSC examination, but there are many other important current issues which may be coming, which I'll be discussing gradually. So first is suspension of labor laws. How we can look at the suspension of labor laws through Marxian perspective, or how what is all the cry and hue about farm bills. This is something that we can also look at through sociological lens. Pandemic, Dalit lives matter, running parallelly on the lines of Black Lives Matter in the Western society. Okay, social distancing, deglobalization. Deglobalization is nothing but a tendency of the nation state to get isolated from one another. See, social distancing is happening not only at the interpersonal level, it is also happening at the larger nation state level. And that is what we can also call as deglobalization. Now the world, the countries, the nation states are getting inward, more and more inward. How else would you explain that Indian society restricting the FDI from Chinese, and which has also led to a war-like condition? Okay, resurgence of nation state, in the sense nation states which at one point of time were considered not so relevant in the times of globalization, in the times of MNC, has now actually resurged to save the people from the larger problem, that is pandemic, and also to think of how to become autonomous once again, that is Atmanirbhar. Okay, anyway, work from home. So I often tell students that work is a mass phenomenon, everybody has to work, but work from home is actually a class privilege, since only the people who belong to service sector, the urban middle class, the new middle class, is the one which is getting this, which is availing this privilege of working from home. How would you say that work from home is not a privilege, when you know that Adivasi, Dalits and women, most of them who are there in the informal sector, they had to go back to their home in the name of reverse migration. They did not have any work from home capacity. So that work from home is a privilege. Okay, so next is digital labor, something which I explained to you in my initial slide as well, when I talked about the evolution of the work and play, okay, and how all of us are performing digital labor. Artificial intelligence, data capitalism. See, I often tell my student, that if you look at the prelim paper, you will see there is a trend, the trend of sustainability, like the questions on biofuel, biochar, all these questions like artificial intelligence. You will see there is a pattern in this question, that pattern is of sustainability. Okay, and the same pattern you can expect even in the mains examination, and which is also reflected in the CSAT paper too. Most of the passages are from the global warming aspect and how to conserve our changing economy or the crisis, how to prevent ourselves from the upcoming crisis, in what way we can modify our technology, all those things. Okay, so how do we look at artificial intelligence through Marxian labor theory of value, and how do we explain it through Weberian theory of rationalization? These are the things that should be known to you. Even if it does not come in the UPSC examination, still you will be able to explain it as an example. Like for example, if a question is asked to you on Weber theory of rationalization, अगर आपको artificial intelligence का example याद है तो आप वहाँ पे example लिख दोगे कि artificial intelligence एक example हो सकता है इसका. Okay. Next is data capitalism. Again, a very important concept where data has become the new means of production. Okay. And emerging classes, okay, accordingly, cybertariat, okay, feminization of agriculture, reverse migration, and there are many other more concepts which are emerging and which I'll be mentioning in my lectures when I deal with the test series. Okay, now the most important thing that student often ask me is how to apply sociological theories to current affairs. Okay, इस चीज के लिए टेलीग्राम पे ग्रुप बनते हैं न जाने के और क्या बकवास बकवास जो एप्लीकेशन है लोग सीखते हैं, which does not make any sense. See, I'll tell you exactly how do we apply sociological theories to something which seems very important in the current discourse. Okay, like for example, let me talk about labor laws, certain issues, and how can we apply Marxism and functionalism to the labor laws? How can we apply Durkheim's theory and Marx theory on division of labor in labor laws? Okay, or how can we apply labor law, labor value, okay, theory in labor laws? See, first of all, we should understand what are labor laws. So labor laws are nothing but they ensure safe and secure working conditions for the industrial workers, and they are put in place in order to mitigate the imbalance of power between the laborers and the state and the corporates. Okay, now in the lockdown itself, those labor laws which are put in place in order to maintain a safe and working condition for the working class, somehow those labor laws were suspended. What are those labor laws? When I talk about Minimum Wage Act, when we talk about Industrial Dispute Act, when we talk about Factory Act, when we talk about Maternity Benefit Act, all these acts in different 13 or 14 states were going to get suspended. So what happened? Suspension means worker rights are declined, collective bargaining is abolished, they could no longer form a trade union, trade unions cannot be formed, and the minimum wage were also dropped. The ceiling, there was a ceiling on the working hours removed. See, there was a point of time, like for example, B.R. Ambedkar had argued that workers should be working at max for 8 hours a day. And Karl Marx also echoed the same sentiment, although Ambedkar came after him. Okay, so but this ceiling on the maximum amount of working hours was removed during the suspension of the labor laws, and the ceiling had gone up to 12 hours. That means the worker now may have to work for even 12 hours. Okay, so the ceiling on the working hours were removed. For example, in Maharashtra, for Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Himachal Pradesh, this is something that we witnessed. Hiring and firing was very easy. It was completely at the whims and fancies of the corporate people, that they could hire and fire easily without any contract. Okay, without any social security. Now, how do we apply sociology here? See, Marx talks about the two different modes of exploitation. One is absolute surplus value and second is relative surplus value. See, when the length of the working day is increased, that means you are now going to appropriate more amount of labor from him, in exchange of which you may not be giving guaranteed wage to him, since minimum wage has also been removed. Okay, so length of the working day increased plus minimum wage also cut, which means surplus value is appropriated. Now, and all this was happening in the name of what? In the garb of recovering economy, in the garb of improving India's ease of doing business index, India's ranking in the ease of doing business index. That means in order to placate, or in order to build a very affiliative relation with the World Bank, all these things were done. Okay, and that explains the concept of alienation and anomy. That means when workers are deprived of their right to homogenize or to or to have a collective bargaining against the corporate sector for which they are working, since Industrial Dispute Act has also been abolished, which that simply means that they have been alienated from their fellow beings. They have been alienated from the self-determination, alienation from the right to self-determination, and unions snatched away from the workers. Third is Industrial Reserve Army. Obviously all these people who were retrenched from the factories, they added up to what Marx would have called as Industrial Reserve Army. Whenever economy goes, whenever economy declines, whenever there is a recessionary tendency in economy, whenever there is a decline in economy, suddenly people are retrenched, they are thrown away, they are fired. All these people are largely those people who are at the manual working class. Okay, and maximum of those people are also the ones who are not socially secured, who are either working as part-time workers or who are having a short-term or ad hoc position in that particular organization. So they are the first ones to get retrenched. Industrial Reserve Army of Labor constitute in Indian society of largely of SCs, STs, OBCs, Muslims and women. And 85% of these people make what we call as informal sector. So, and these people, since they are divided along religious, gender and caste lines, it impedes true consciousness among them. Otherwise, they would have homogenized and they would have revolted against the state, but they did not have capacity to express their voice or to express their dissent against the state and against the corporate sector. And that is why they started going back to their home. And from here on comes the concept known as reverse migration. Now, the next is latent dysfunction of whatever I just explained to you. Okay, the unintended consequences, the bad unintended consequences. It largely pushed workers into debt slavery, forced labor, since they have been expelled, they have been retrenched. Now they will be desperately wanting to have some amount of work so that they could maintain or sustain their livelihood. So that automatically pushes them into debt slavery. Now they have become vulnerable to get more and more exploited, since they are looking for work and they would be ready to work for any amount of work, since minimum wage has also been abolished. So they would be ready, a ready-made labor who's just looking to just fulfill his need and his family member. So that may automatically push him into forced labor, which is nothing but ultra wires of the Article 23, that is right against forced labor and ILO's convention. So democracy, B.R. Ambedkar once said that democracy should not exist only at the political level, it should also exist at the economic level. That means political freedom in itself is a farcical idea without having economic freedom, and he was talking from the perspective of workers. Okay, since he was also to some extent a Marxist scholar, so he was equally concerned about the laboring class, the working class. Okay, and he said that it may develop a new kind of government, that is private government which is working in order to secure the interest of private sector only. How else would you explain that government suspended labor laws but did not hike the corporate tax? Okay, democracy only at the political form, not at economic front, private government, that is Ambedkar. Next is feminist perspective. Suspension of maternity benefit and equal remuneration put women to great disadvantage, both for domestic chores and travel safety. Decline in female labor force participation rate can also be explained by this, and this increased the cases of domestic violence and unleashed the currents of egoism. Here I am introducing Durkheim. When women were retrenched from the informal sector, where largely they find employment, since they feel that they are much more safe and it is much more comfortable for them in the informal sector, since they can avail part-time worker and since they have to look after their family as well. When they were retrenched, ultimately it increased the cases of domestic violence. They went back to their home, and the male laboring class, which was also going back to home in the name of reverse migration. What happened? Okay, so ultimately it left women more and more vulnerable to domestic violence. Okay, and it unleashed currents of egoism, and more number of people committed suicide during this lockdown. Okay, they did not feel the sense of integration. Okay, somehow they feel they have been compelled to come together once again. Somehow the male force, okay, when they went back to their home, they were not able to find the work which could feed them, the work which could feed their family. Okay, so informalization of workforce. The new bondage represents nothing but forced and anomic division of labor. Neo bondage in the sense the debt slavery and the forced labor. it reveals nothing but forced and anomic division of labor, since they are now vulnerable and they are completely at the whims and fancy of the people who are going to employ them. So that may leave them more and more vulnerable to get exploited. So this may lead to forced and anomic division of labor, since society, as we went into lockdown, society immediately went into anomy phase, what Durkheim would call as anomy. Okay, since it was a sudden change, it was imposed overnight, okay, without any preparedness. So these are the footloose labor who are going back to home. Footloose in the sense they do not have any definite occupation. Okay, John Bremen is one scholar who has conceptualized this notion of footloose labor, reverse migration, increased pressure on labor exporting states. Now the labor class actually come largely from states like UP, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, all those. Now the laboring class, when lockdown happened, they had to come from Maharashtra, Delhi, again back to their own places. That means the labor exporting states had to import back the same labor which they had once exported in order to give them more opportunities. Not to say that states exported them, but largely they are considered as the labor exporting states. Okay, so this actually led to defeminization of agriculture. It was only because of the male working class which migrated to Delhi, Mumbai, Maharashtra, all those places, that women found some occupation in the agriculture, which led to feminization of agriculture. But when the men came back to their places, it actually led to defeminization of the agriculture, disguised unemployment with agrarian distress. Only through collective efforts and solidarity between government, employees and workers, which is a tripartite dialogue conceptualized by International Labour Organization, we can achieve organic solidarity, and we can advance social justice, promote decent work and repair the damaged bonds between laborers and the state. And keeping this thing in mind, the state launched Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. So that's how we can use Durkheim and Marx in order to explain the suspension of labor laws and the consequent damage that happened to the labor class with the suspension of the labor laws. Okay. Now, okay. So now is the time to discuss important sources. What can be the most important sources? Where should we read all these things from? How do we develop this capacity to look at anything through sociological perspective? Let us look at the important sources. I believe that the most important source for paper 2 is Economic and Political Weekly. You will often see people telling you to read Modernization of Indian Tradition by Yogendra Singh, or you will often see people telling you to read Yojana Kurukshetra. Trust me, nothing is going to help you. Nothing is going to help you. If you ignore EPW, you are not going to get 300 plus marks. You can take this from me in writing. Okay. The next is the Hindu important articles, which I'll be circulating among the students who would be joining the test series and my foundation course, because my whole concern is to make sure that people learn not only theories but their contemporary application and relevance as well. Otherwise, their learning is of no use. Okay. Third is LiveMint, which can help you to obtain quantitative data and graphics, which can help you to give certain edge in your answers. And lastly, Level Up IAS handouts, which are very important handouts from the theoretical part, Thinker specifically, because most of the students are not able to understand Thinker so deeply. So that is why I have designed a special course for Thinker oriented, which is specifically Thinker oriented, which I'll be giving to the students, okay, who would be joining my test series. That will be given focus purely on concepts and their contemporary application. So without any ado, I'll be waiting for you to join the test series as soon as possible. And trust me, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity that that is not available to everyone. You are one of those students who are going to write mains, and some of you may be writing mains next year, but you know, such kind of opportunities come very hardly in life, where you get to learn everything at very minimum cost in under just one roof. So please do not waste your time and join the test series as soon as possible. I'll be waiting for you. Thank you.
Hit the bell icon to never miss an update from Level Up IAS. Make sure you like, share, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel.